check into the hotel.
Okay, you want me to call you back in 15?
No, like I can just sit in the lobby here and chat with you. It's just as good.
Okay. Okay, fair enough.
Just hold on a sec. I'll just let Chelsea know.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Can you find Jocelyn? She's right there. She's right there. Okay. I'll see you guys in a bit. All right. You can go ahead now.
Cool.
I'm good.
So did you guys, was the last end pretty close or was it wide open?
The last end was
Yeah.
not wide open. There was lots of guards in play. What the heck did she try to play? She didn't really have a great shot on her last. She played a run back on her first that got one of our three, but wasn't good enough.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so I won't, I'll go right now just so I don't keep you too long. So basically want to touch base on a little bit of the quote unquote Broomgate in general.
yeah.
For lack of a better term, that's what people are calling it. I don't like it, but that's what people are calling it.
Right.
And then touch on some of the points you raised in the article that you did, or in the story you did with the newspaper in Calgary, and that'll kind of, I'm trying to paint an overall picture of this. I find there's articles that kind of have one leaning, and then there's others that have another leaning, and I've done some stuff on my podcast with Nolan Thiessen and Mike Fournier and Don Landry of who's a journalist for Yahoo Sports Canada, but I've never had the opportunity to speak with a member of one of the ladies teams about the situation. I mean, I when I interviewed Chelsea last week, I mean, I asked her one question about it, but at that point it was just coming out, and so to use her words, her response was wishy-washy.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so so the first question I would have is now, did any of the women that you have spoken to on the women's tour have any inkling that the concern over the directional fabric, quote unquote, was heating up prior to this two cells event in Toronto?
That's a good one. There was some comments directed at us, mostly in the autumn gold, about how we were sweeping with the ice pad brooms. So, to that extent, anyone sort of directly asking us or talking to us? No. Some comments made at teams that we played against. Yes.
Okay. Now, none of the teams that were participating in the women's event at the Stu Cells in Toronto was part of that original 22 teams that signed the agreement. Pardon me. Do you know if any of the women's teams were actually involved in the meeting that took place in Toronto, or that eventually led to that statement by Nolan Thiessen, or was it pretty much, just the guys who had seen what the prototype from Balance Plus was doing and said, listen, we've got to address this before it goes any further?
So what I understand, I believe what Nolan has indicated is that Val, Rachel, and Caitlin were contacted, had to be after the meeting because there's minutes of the meeting from a locker room and there's no indication of any sort of female input. And more than that, the minutes of that meeting, which Adam Casey took and Curling Canada then distributed, clearly indicate that they'd come up with an idea that they would have a committee and they'd have representatives from each broom manufacturer, and they sort of appointed those people, and there was definitely no women involved in any of that. So was there some after phone calls made? That's quite possible. I wasn't involved in those, but I understand that's what Nolan has indicated. I would also just sort of say, interestingly, on the women's side, when you're talking about the top 10 teams in the world, you're talking about actually quite a few European teams, and I bet you a lot of money that Team Tirinzoni, who won the first slam and is an ice pad team, was also not contacted.
Okay, fair enough. You want me to keep that inside in the actual interview that I post?
Up to you, but I'm just saying when you consult three teams and they're all Canadian and none of them are hardline teams, but I mean, and you're not even involving them in the meeting, you're actually sort of post consulting them. I don't think that's adequate by any means.
So your team was one of the original 22 that quote unquote signed a document, and this is kind of tying back into the question what we were just discussing. Was your team consulted prior to the drafting of the document, or were you simply provided a copy of the statement saying and told, hey, do you guys agree with this or not?
A bit of both. So Nolan had forwarded what he was intending to, like a sort of a first draft, and invited input. So with that piece of it, I think that it was done sort of appropriately, at least.
Okay, that's fair. Now, the central point I'm tying into pardon me, to the ice pad here a little bit. The central point that seems to be ignored in all the discussions that I've heard taking place was that nothing had been done by players or the governing parties to address concerns about the hardline ice pad until Bounce Plus introduced that prototype at Stu Cells.
Correct.
Rather than having the players decide on a voluntary ban of broom heads, do you think the integrity of the game would have been better served had the governing bodies of the sport introduced restrictions on any broom technology that had not been introduced in competition until the start of this season? And I'm asking you that question because I've heard it from a couple of people where they said, "Listen, if there was such a huge concern about the ice pad, then why wasn't it raised before then?" And rumblings are one thing, but there's a difference between rumblings and then saying, "Listen, you guys shouldn't. It's unfair. You guys shouldn't be playing with those brooms." And then all of this brouhaha, if you will, started when Bounce Plus introduced their Blackhead or whatever name they call that
Yeah.
prototype and basically chewed up the ice. So do you think it would have been in the best interest because all of this has been kind of like wrapped up in a neat bow, and I'm not being cynical. I'm just saying that's the way it's been positioned. It's been wrapped up in a neat bow that the decision was taken to issue that statement because the players were trying to protect the integrity of the game. But in the meantime, there were players who, if you listen to Hardline, if you listen to some of the stuff you said in the article, if you listen to or if you read the statement of Mike McCune yesterday, none of the folks that use Hardline have agreed or have stated publicly that they believe that their fabric has any kind of directional effect, if you will. So
Well, so we sign off. You're right. We're one of 22 teams that sign off on a statement that has a lot of problems with it, and I knew that at the time. So, what is directional fabric? What's the definition of that? And how do you ascertain right now in the middle of the season when I'm using something that I've used for 15 months, and we have sponsorship agreements that we made a decision in August to align ourselves with Hardline or sooner than that, whatever, and there's nothing illegal about what we're using, and then Balance Plus throws something in the mix that pushes the envelope. And I mean, that's their business decision. I'm not going to comment on whether that's appropriate or not, but it was the impetus. Now, show me a sport where there's been sort of conversations about technology and whether or not it was something that needs to be regulated, where they actually stopped in the middle of a season when you have all those obligations.
yeah, and that's fair. I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to get to is
Yeah,
that it seems like a decision was taken in the boiler room of a curling club to say, hey, listen, we need to stop this. To me, it's more of a corporate kind of push. That's off the record, of course, but to me, that's what happened.
hmm
And it was anyways. And hey, I still use a Brownie, and my curling shoes are so old I couldn't tell you what make it is. So I got no horse in this race.
yeah,
But everything I'm hearing is that it was you know, kind of like a manufacturer and a couple of elite players got together for a beer one day and said, "Hey, we got to stop this stuff because
that's right.
the new kids on the block have some great products. Our teams
That's right.
aren't doing as well as a result of it, and our sales are going down as a result of it. So let's nip this in the bud."
That's
And
right. I
and
agree with that.
I mean, I can't prove it, so I'd never state it publicly, but to me that's what happened. So anyways, and we can't get into that on the record because
But I
obviously
can on the record say, but I can say on the record, I did say with the Calgary Herald, but I mean, he really focused on the gender bent, which is a part of it, but it's not all that I have to say. What I can say is that the adverse effect on a small Canadian business, in this case Hardline, is disgusting. And when you look at both the sort of minutes from the men's players meeting in Toronto, which sort of says, inside them, well, 3 to 10 weeks is sufficient for a manufacturer to respond appropriately to what? I don't know exactly. I mean, it's outrageous. I do question whether or not there was a whit of business sense in the room from a practical standpoint. I mean, so when the players sit there and they have conversations, men, women, European or Canadian, I think that there's a real problem on two fronts from a manufacturer's perspective. Number one, they don't have enough skin in the game to worry about the impacts of what happens to a business, right? And number two, you're you can't sort of dictate as players who speaks for the manufacturers, and that's kind of what happened in that meeting. And I find that, I mean, just makes no sense from a business perspective.
gotcha. No, that and I think that makes a lot of sense. and I think it's something that's being underplayed. Now, did you want to speak very briefly? I got a couple more questions, but did you want to speak? Some people have questioned one of the tactics that was used, I guess, with a lot of the curlers, not only the elite teams, but a lot of the curlers in Canada, is not only to go along with the statement that was issued by Nolan on behalf of the group. There was also apparently another email circulating, which was
Yeah,
authored
yeah,
by a Southern Ontario men's team that
yes.
was basically threatening, and I use the word threatening for lack of a better word, but essentially threatening teams that would continue to use hardline, that they would be shamed or be positioned as cheaters if they kept using that particular technology. So, to me, I guess that's kind of like below the belt. But is any reaction to using that particular tactic and trying to get something done? I guess.
Yeah, so what I did say in the Calgary Herald article that the email from Team Glenn Howard was, I thought, a shaming email, and I don't think that it's appropriate. Now, Richard Hart reached out to me in the last couple of days, and we've been in touch a little bit, and this is not personal. Like, I really quite enjoy Richard, and I enjoy Glenn, and I haven't been around the other two as much, but this is I think one of the things that's happened is the dynamic of a curling community where people don't want to lose friendships and relationships and respect of other people. And that's not what this should be about. This should be a bigger question about what is appropriate, how can we regulate, what kinds of things are okay or not okay, how do you manage those things? So at a World Curling Tour or a Slam event, maybe that can be managed and audited or regulated. But the reality is going to be, how the heck, when you can get a lot of points in an event like Red Deer or Vernon or Lloydminster or whatever, we're a self-regulated sport. And there's just so many events. I don't even know how it's going to be managed. So when I would say, this is what I would say, I did not appreciate the email from Team Glenn Howard. I also question Curling Canada having forwarded that to players, because I think it was, the tone of it was inappropriate in my view and unprofessional. What their thoughts and opinions are is fine. I respect those guys and what they've done in the game. You can't pick some of the more influential players and people, really. So this is the thing that I think gets mixed up in this whole conversation is, I disagree with them. I disagree with the choice they made, but I like them, right?
It makes it, yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. It's such a tight knit community that you're absolutely right. I think it's hard to. They say never get into business with your friends, right? And this is essentially
Yes.
exactly what it is. It's the game of the sport of curling, because it's evolving and which is a good thing. Now business and friendships and buddies and let's have a beer and whatever are kind of getting mixed. And when there's a lot of money at play, and when you've got manufacturers that have a lot of money at stake, to be honest, I don't think the sport and the curling community has caught up to the growth of the game, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, and I also this is the thing. They can't get away from the fact that they have a key interest. They have a conflict of interest, really, in the game. They have skin in the game. They're a huge Bounce Plus team. Bounce Plus has an interest. And so do I. I'm an ice pad. I'm a hardline team. But, there is that colors your sort of opinion and impression and perspective, right?
Now, in the interview you did with the Calgary newspaper, you indicated that you were frustrated by the fact that the decision to issue the statement was essentially made by a small group of male players while at the event in Toronto. What process, in your opinion, should have been followed to address that issue? Is it mid-season, or is there how to address it in mid-season? Was it possible to do it in a fair way mid-season, or do you think it would have been best to just wait until after the season was done and then deal with it then?
I think the players who were impacted right there in Sioux Falls could have made a statement. And then, they could do whatever they want. They're privy to a lot more information than I was at the time. They saw the blackhead or the whatever Bounce Plus put out there in action. I have not, right? So they can do whatever they want. But I think where it bled out was when you start to get statements that are much broader in the sense of, the real impact on junior curling, women's curling, all aspects of curling out of that conversation, I don't think was really contemplated. I personally think that meeting displays a bit of arrogance on the elite men's team side.
Fair enough. Now, the last question I have, you let me know if you want to answer it or not, but I've got to ask it because it's an interesting question. Many in the curling community, on the blogs and the forums and whatever, have seemed surprised by how reactive rather than proactive curling's governing bodies were to deal with the issue, at least publicly. I mean, you just raised the point that Curling Canada forwarded the letter by the players.
Right.
Many have said that it's almost like the tail is wagging the dog, for lack of a better word. Should that be a concern to the players that a relatively small group of players could basically, at least from a public perspective, sort of like tell the governing bodies what they're going to do now, and then have the governing bodies kind of react to it after the fact?
Uh, I mean, players have to have a voice. So the fact that the governing bodies are listening to players is a positive thing. I think one of the things that I do question again is how does that voice get disseminated? So I would love to see a true players rep, men's and women's side, that is not got skin in the Curling Canada game, or something that's a bit different, right? I mean, or a former player, somebody like a Amber Holland or Cheryl Bernard could really contribute to the conversation in a meaningful way. And that's not really the way it's set up. It's kind of ad hoc-ish in the sense that I'm not sure what conversations Curling Canada did or didn't have about forwarding minutes from the Stu Sells event, or forwarding the email from Team Glenn Howard. I can't speculate about that, but I do question exactly what the purpose of that was.
Fair enough. Now, just going back really quickly to last year, to me, I guess what a lot of people, outsiders like myself looking in, were saying, apparently there were rumblings about what the Brooms were doing middle to late last year. I'm just wondering if there was an issue, and I guess maybe this year some of the elite teams started figuring out how to work their Brooms better, whatever the case might be. I just wonder why they didn't do a meeting at the end of last year, bring all, especially the Players Championships. 18 of the 22 teams were there. And, and you get the manufacturers, you get the World Curling Federation, you get Curling Canada, you get the elite players, you get them all in a room and you say, hey, listen, there's some concerns. We're going to work on it during the next year. Let's keep the products as they, whatever you guys decide. To me, it's just like, it was almost as if everybody knew there was a ticking time bomb, and nobody really wanted to do anything about it until somebody else kind of took the lead. And so, and it took, unfortunately, that situation at Stu Sells, and I think in every, of all the stakeholders who could have taken the lead, Amy, I think the worst one could have been a manufacturer, and it would appear that it's a manufacturer who took the lead. Because they introduced they introduced a prototype, they were wrecking the ice, and everybody else at that point said, forgive my language, they said, holy shit. And
yes.
and they said, okay, we got to deal with this now. So anyways, that's just, now usually if you got 2 minutes, usually what I do at the end of my interviews, I do quick fire questions, which are much funner than the stuff we've just discussed.
Sure.
And I'll throw them at you, and whatever first comes to your to mind. You get to play one game for $1 million, winner take all, and your current or former teammates are not available. Who do you call to be part of your team?
I'll take Dom McEwen. And oh god, Dom McEwen for sure. She's an amazing lead. One game. See, this is not an easy question. I'll take all of you, and I will be Jill Officer.
there you go. All of you say the same thing. God, that's a tough question. Okay, next question. If you could play one game against any curling team from any era, who would you choose to play against and why?
Oh, I'd love to play Marilyn Dart. Marilyn Bodo at her high, extreme level of, because she's just legendary crazy.
Perfect. By the way, this is an aside. Any idea whatever happened to Kim Gillard? Did she just completely quit the sport and move on to other things, or she just fallen right off the map?
I think, well, what I knew about, I feel like she went profession and family is kind of what happened.
And that's fair enough. It just she was
same
right
as
up.
Corey Beveridge, actually, who
Yeah.
was the second at the time. Yeah.
I will tell you one very quick story. I was in university. I was representing York University at a mixed bonspiel, and we were going to the semifinals, and we were all cocky because McMaster University was playing a team that had a female skip. And being a young guy at that point in time, we figured, no problem, we've got this covered. Little did we know that the 2 women on McMaster's mixed team were Kim Gillard and Corey Beveridge. So we pretty well got spanked. Okay, two more. What is the one shot you'd like to have back?
Oh gosh, probably Charles Finals 2009 outturn draw on the last end.
What is your fondest curling memory to date?
Definitely 2005 trials in Halifax, winning that game. It'll never be beat.
Perfect. And then finally, which member of the World Curling Tour would make the best Prime Minister?
Me.
There you go. Perfect. Well, you know what? You'll laugh, and I won't tell you who until we put them all together. But somebody else mentioned you, and John Mead gets a lot of votes.
He would, yes, he
Yes,
would.
you and John Mead seem to be the popular ones.
That's awesome.
Thank you very much, Amy. If there's, I'll put it together over the next couple of days. I'm hoping to put the interview up by Sunday or Monday at the latest.
Okay.
And thanks for this. And I'll email you. Sorry, I'll send you a message on Twitter before I send it out, so you know it's going to be up.
Okay, Paul.
Okay,
Thanks.
thanks a lot, Amy. I appreciate it.
All right.
Okay,
Yeah,
bye.
no worries. Bye.